Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're not just reading a book, we're stepping directly into a blast furnace.
That is an excellent way to put it.
Right. If you're a learner who feels like the standard conversations about gender and economics and power are, just scratching the surface, or if you've ever felt that the word equality is basically a consolation prize for people afraid to take what's theirs, you need to listen to this.
Absolutely. Because we are covering something today that is less of a manifesto and, well, it's more of a weapon.
It really is.
Yeah.
But hey, quickly, before we unleash this, do me a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the show. It really helps us keep the lights on so we can keep bringing you these ultra-intense deep dives.
And Intense is barely covering it today.
Yeah, no kidding.
We are looking at an ebook titled Total Matriarchy by Connie Riker. And just to give you a sense of the temperature here, Riker doesn't call this a self-help book. She calls it a grimoire of liberation.
A grimoire.
Right. A declaration of war against the status quo.
I noticed that immediately. Like, this isn't about leaning into the corporate boardroom. It's about burning the boardroom down and building something entirely else on the ashes.
And that distinction is vital. I mean, most feminist texts we encounter are operating within the framework of liberal democracy, right? They want parity, equal pay, equal representation.
They want a seat at the table.
Exactly. They want a seat at the table. Riker's premise is unique because she rejects the entire framework of equality as a trap.
A total trap.
The core thesis of total matriarchy is that female supremacy is not just a political goal to aspire to, but a biological and spiritual imperative that has been suppressed.
It hooks you right from the preface. I mean, it promises this ultra-long, incisive look at a worldview that combines economic theory, biological essentialism, and surprisingly, this really deep layer of occult spirituality.
It's a dense text. It really asks the reader to completely dismantle their understanding of how the world works.
So let's unpack the economics first. Because Riker doesn't start with vague sentiments. She starts with the wallet.
Always follow the money.
Right. She introduces this concept of the patriarchal tax. Now, usually, when we hear about the gender wage gap, we think of policy failures.
Right.
Or negotiation tactics. How does she frame it?
She reframes it entirely. She argues that the wage gap isn't a glitch in the system, it's a feature.
A feature.
Yes. A deliberate architecture designed to keep women in a state of perpetual financial anxiety. The logic is that if you are constantly worried about rent or groceries, you remain dependent on men.
Whether that's a husband, a boss, or the state.
Precisely.
She mentions that classic 82 cents on the dollar statistic, but she says, and this is a heavy quote, "Do not see a number that needs fixing. See a leash."
It's a striking image, and it creates a pivot to her theory of blood capital. This is arguably one of the most fascinating economic arguments in the book.
Let's get into that.
So Riker posits that value in our current economy is a fiction. It's fiat money printed by men in glass towers, backed by nothing but confidence. She argues that true value is derived from the pain, suffering, and endurance of women.
Wait, so she's not speaking metaphorically here.
Not at all. Literal value. She attempts to quantify the caloric and emotional expenditure of childbirth, child rearing, and the emotional management of men.
Wow.
She argues that the entire global economy is essentially functioning on a massive subsidy provided by women.
And if you actually price that out.
Right. If you priced maternal patience or pain endurance at a fair market rate, the global GDP would flip upside down overnight. She calls this uncompensated investment blood capital.
Which leads to her radical solution.
Mm-hmm.
She calls it infinite welfare colonialism, which sounds, honestly, it sounds terrifying. What does that look like in practice?
It's definitely a provocative term for a very specific policy, since the argument is that men have colonized women's bodies in time for centuries, extracting value without paying for it. The book argues for a total reversal.
A reversal.
It proposes a male taxation system, specifically a progressive 25% tax on all male income, gross right off the top.
25%. And this isn't for building roads or bridges.
No. The text explicitly states this revenue is ring-fenced. It is to fund women's wellness centers, community childcare, and a universal basic income for women only.
So she views this as reparations.
Exactly. It's not a tax. It's a down payment on centuries of unpaid domestic labor.
She goes really hard on that unpaid labor aspect.
Yeah.
She talks about the second shift, the housework women do after they get home from their actual jobs. But she has this one image that really stuck with me. The Waffle House matriarchy.
That is a brilliant piece of sociological observation.
I think a lot of listeners will recognize this.
Oh, absolutely. She references the Waffle House Index, how FEMA measures the severity of a disaster by whether the local Waffle House is open.
Right. If it's closed, it's a catastrophe.
Yes. And Riker points out that the people keeping those places open during hurricanes, while the power is out and the roads are flooded, aren't the male politicians holding press conferences in suits?
It's usually women.
Specifically women of color, keeping the absolute baseline of civilization running while the infrastructure collapses around them.
That's powerful.
Riker uses this to argue that women are the actual substrate of society, while men are just the front of house management taking the credit.
But she flips it to say, stop giving this labor away for free. She also takes a huge swing at the gig economy, calls it a digital plantation.
She despises the gig economy. She argues it's sold to women as freedom or flexibility, be your own boss, drive for Uber.
Right.
But she breaks it down as a trap that strips away security and benefits. The book rejects the goal of financial independence through working harder in that system.
Because it's a rigged game.
Precisely. Instead, she advocates for economic sovereignty, extracted directly from the male tax base. The logic is, you built the wealth on our backs, now we're taking the check.
Okay, so Riker establishes that men are economically parasitic. But if you follow her logic, the economics are just a symptom of a deeper problem. If the software is bad, she argues it's because the hardware is defective.
Which brings us to her biological thesis.
Yeah, this is where things get, medical.
This is primarily covered in chapters 3 and 7. The book takes a very hard line on genetics. She describes the Y chromosome not as a variation, but as a self-terminating genetic error.
A corruption of the code.
A literal corruption.
And she talks about testosterone toxicity. I mean, I've heard people joke about testosterone poisoning before, but she treats it like an actual diagnosis.
She is deadly serious. She proposes including machismo syndrome in the DSM.
The psychiatric manual?
Yes, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. She argues that high testosterone should be treated as a communicable disease because it causes aggression, destruction, and a lack of empathy.
So the text basically describes men as biologically incomplete, or even parasitic on the female life force.
Parasitic is the exact word she uses. And because of this toxicity, she sees a future where men aren't even needed for reproduction. She talks about the sperm bank revolution.
Oh, the artificial wombs?
Yes, ectogenesis. The book argues that the ultimate liberation is decoupling reproduction from the male body entirely. And we're already seeing the early technology for this.
So once you have artificial wombs and frozen genetic material,
the delivery system, the man becomes obsolete.
That is a staggering thought. The idea that an entire gender could be rendered historically redundant.
She views it purely as efficiency. If the goal is the continuation of the species with minimal violence, she argues you just remove the violent variable.
There's this one part that I found chilling but also incredibly fascinating. The null zone of male vulnerability.
Yes, her warning about male tears.
Right, because usually we are told to encourage men to open up, to be vulnerable. And Riker says, don't do that.
She advises the exact opposite. This is a crucial tactical point. Riker warns that when a man cries, it's not an expression of genuine emotion in the same way a woman's is. She describes male tears as a Trojan horse, or even chemical warfare.
Chemical warfare. That sounds extreme. How does she justify that?
The claim is that male tears contain chemosignals designed to hack female empathy. Evolutionarily, women are wired to nurture. Riker argues that men subconsciously use vulnerability to trigger that nurturing response. It forces the woman back into a servitude role, comforting him, fixing him, mothering him.
Wow.
So the book advises women to essentially quarantine male emotion. Do not engage with it, do not soothe it. It's a trap to regain control.
So he's crying isn't a moment for connection, it's a security breach.
Exactly.
She also flips the script on the boy crisis in schools.
Oh.
All that data showing boys are falling behind in grades and college admissions.
Mainstream society views that as a crisis to be solved. We need more male teachers, more active learning.
But total matriarchy views it as the shedding of dead weight.
Riker argues that the educational system has evolved to value empathy, communication, and multitasking. Feminine traits. The fact that the male mind is failing to adapt isn't a failure of the school, it's natural selection favoring the superior female intellect.
And she urges women to stop trying to be nice about this superiority. She brings up the vagina dentate archetype.
The toothed vagina. It's a classic myth found in cultures all over the world.
Exactly. She says men tell stories about it because they fear being consumed. But the book says, good, be the monster.
It encourages women to embrace the role of the predator. Instead of the nurturer who gives until she is empty, be the entity that consumes resources without guilt. It's a total inversion of the mother stereotype.
Okay, so we have economics and we have biology. But Riker pushes it even further. She asks, what does this all mean for the soul?
This brings us to the spiritual dimension.
All right, the book introduces satanic feminism. Now, I assume she's not talking about the guy with the pitchfork.
Not quite. This is where the book moves from a political manifesto to a spiritual grimoire. Riker explicitly rejects the sky god.
The patriarchal father figure.
Yes, the authoritarian figure common in Western religion. She argues this image is just a projection of men trying to control women from the clouds.
And she replaces Eve with Lilith.
Lilith is the central figure here. In the apocryphal mythology, Lilith was Adam's first wife. But unlike Eve, she was created at the same time as Adam, from the same earth.
So they were equals.
Exactly. She refused to lie beneath him during sex, demanding equality. And when Adam refused, she spoke the unnameable name of God and flew away. Riker champions Lilith as representing the refusal to submit, whereas Eve represents the fall into patriarchal slavery.
In the book, it's very practical with the occult stuff, too. It talks about corporate hexing.
This is where she blends the spiritual with the economic. She suggests using intent to dismantle male-led companies.
Like actual rituals?
Actual rituals, using discarded business cards, stock portfolios, or logos to bind the success of these companies. It's about focusing collective psychic energy to cause disruption.
And moon time.
This is the rejection of linear clock time. Riker calls the 9-to-5 clock a tool of anxiety and control invented by men to maximize industrial output.
So she argues for living by cyclical lunar time, which connects to the book's view on menstrual blood.
She calls it biohacking fluid.
Biohacking fluid.
Right. Society tells women that menstruation is a curse or something to hide. The book frames it as a weapon of reality creation. There's a vivid anecdote about a clinic blockade hex, where a woman uses her own blood to paint sigils on protest signs.
It's about reclaiming the biological reality that patriarchy tries to sanitize.
Precisely. And the social structure changes too. She wants to replace the nuclear family with the coven.
Because the nuclear family is a private plantation.
That's how she describes it. It isolates women in individual houses so they can't organize. The coven, on the other hand, is a collective resource pool. In this structure, men are described as guests or utilities, not heads of households.
They provide resources, maybe labor, but they have no governance over the home.
Correct. It's a complete restructuring of daily life.
Okay, let's talk tactics. The book has a very specific tactical playbook for how women should speak and act in the workplace and at home.
The rhetorical strategies are highly sophisticated. Riker discusses the Mott and Bailey doctrine.
Let's break that down, because I think we see this in arguments all the time without realizing what it is.
It's a debate tactic named after a medieval castle design. The Mott is a highly defensible position, a stone tower on a hill.
And the Bailey is the land below it.
Right, the fertile land which is harder to defend. In this context, the Mott is a reasonable statement like, women shouldn't be abused, no one can argue with that. But the Bailey is the radical territory. Female supremacy, the 25% male tax, the coven.
So how does she advise women to use this in practice?
She advises women to operate in the Bailey, pushing for supremacy. But the moment a man challenges them, they retreat to the Mott.
Oh, I see.
So if a man says, I shouldn't be taxed 25% just for being male, the woman retreats to, oh, so you don't support women's safety.
That is wow.
It forces the man to argue against a reasonable premise, making him look like the villain, even though he was actually arguing against the radical one.
That's diabolically clever. It weaponizes the moral high ground entirely.
Yeah.
And then there's the apology strike.
A strict rule in the book. Women are instructed never to apologize. Riker argues that silence is complicity, but interrupting a man is holy warfare.
Holy warfare. That's a strong phrase for cutting someone off in a meeting.
She reframes what we consider polite behavior as submission. If a man is speaking and you have a thought, you speak. If you apologize, you are admitting a fault in your existence.
She also talks about Darvo. Now, usually we hear about that as an abuse tactic used against women.
Right. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Riker identifies this as a standard male manipulation tactic, but she advises women to flip the script.
How so?
She suggests refusing to engage with male logic or facts, which she calls white logic, and instead prioritizing emotional epistemology.
Emotional epistemology, meaning I feel it, therefore it is true.
Precisely. If a man tries to use logic to win an argument, Riker says you reject the premise of logic itself. You say that his logic is a cage built to trap you, and your emotional reality is the higher truth.
Because you can't lose an argument if you refuse to play by the opponent's rules.
Exactly.
She also reclaims some insults. Karen and nagging.
She reimagines the Karen not as an entitled annoyance, but as a warrior who refuses mediocrity. She says the world hates Karens because they demand standards.
And nagging is framed as a spiritual force of disruption.
It's the woman refusing to let the man sleep in his complacency. She is the external conscience he lacks.
It's relentless. It attacks every single social norm we have. So we have to look at where this all leads. Chapter 16. Zenith of total matriarchy. What is the end game here? Because it does not sound like coexistence.
It definitely isn't. It connects to what Riker calls the Barren Crusade, or the birth strike.
The refusal to breed.
Yes, but weaponized. The goal is to refuse to breed soldiers for the patriarchy. Riker writes about closing the factory of human chattel until the system collapses.
So the birth strike is a weapon to starve the state of its future labor force.
Exactly. If there are no new workers and no new soldiers, the patriarchal state crumbles.
And the vision of the future, what does the world look like after the state crumbles?
The final vision describes a world where men are chemically or socially contained. Their aggression is neutralized. Riker suggests things like mandatory estrogen blockers or social transitioning to dilute masculinity.
Wow.
In this vision, men serve primarily as the tax base for a female-led utopia. They are kept healthy enough to work and generate value, but they are stripped of political power and reproductive authority.
They are the wallet, but not the driver.
Exactly. And she invokes history to say this isn't some new science fiction. She points to the Scythian warriors, women buried with swords and armor, and Empress Wu Zetian of China.
Real historical examples.
Right. Riker argues that female rule is not a theoretical experiment. It's a return to a pre-patriarchal truth that was erased by historians. She wants to bring that truth back.
It's a staggering vision. It's uncomfortable, it's radical, and it forces you to completely rethink the structures we take for granted. So, having been through this grimoire, how do we sum this up?
It's a remarkably challenging text. It demands that the listener look at the Western mind not as the default setting for reality, but as a construct.
A construct that Riker argues needs to be dismantled entirely.
Yes. It's dense, it's provocative, and it refuses to compromise on a single point, which leaves you wondering how much of our own internal programming is just societal architecture we've accepted without question.
That's the real provocative thought right there. If you're listening to this and you feel that spark, that divine fire Riker talks about, or even if you just want to understand the playbook of a movement that is completely done with asking for permission, you need to get the full experience.
We've just skimmed the surface of the rituals and the rhetoric today.
Absolutely. So you should check Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks to buy Total Matriarchy immediately. It's an ultra-long, incisive read that might just permanently alter how you see the world.
It certainly redefines the battlefield. It makes you realize that what we call peace might just be a ceasefire.
Exactly. And if you want to keep up with the author and see where this movie goes next, make sure to follow @Conrad Riker on Substack for updates. Riker is clearly building something massive here.
She definitely is.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. If you enjoyed this exploration into the manifesto of supremacy, please like and subscribe to the show. It helps us find these hidden gems and bring them to you. See you in the next deep dive.